Okay, so how bad is this thing going to get? Well, nobody knows is the answer because we don't actually know the transmission rate. We know it's easier to transmit than the flu, apparently. We also know it's more deadly than the flu. According to Dr. Anthony Fauci of the National Institute for Allergies and Infectious Disease, according to Fauci, this thing is at least 10 times as deadly as the flu. We don't actually know the rates because in some areas it's a lot lower than in other areas. We don't know because we don't know what the public health response is going to be. We don't know how much of this is due to lack of proper medical staffing and how much of this is due to the actual deadliness of the disease itself. With that said, it is obviously very risky, and there have been a wide variety of sort of articles put out there about how bad this thing could get. The New York Times has put together a model, Nicholas Kristof and Stuart Thompson writing, what's at stake in this coronavirus pandemic? How many Americans could become infected? How many might actually die? The answers depend on the actions we take and crucially on when we take them. Working with infectious disease epidemiologists, we developed an interactive tool that lets you see what may lie ahead in the United States, how much of a difference it could make if officials act quickly. The figures are for America. The lessons are broadly applicable to any country. Okay, so they have a bunch of different scenarios here as far as what exactly could happen. So they say if we stayed on current track, then the model predicts that roughly a third of Americans, more than 100 million people, could become infected, including more than 9 million people at one time. Right? That's if we take no protective measures, basically. That's if we just kind of leave everything as it is. We don't build up capacity. We don't stay home. We don't cancel events. That, of course, is not what's happening. Right? We're already moving along the South Korean tack, which is lock it down, lock everything down, stay home, right? Which is the smart thing to do. In this particular scenario, up to 1 million people could die in the United States, which of course would be just an unbelievable trauma to the United States. That would be if no action was taken and if the peak of the infections happened in mid-July. That also assumes that presumably the summer would not really curtail the spread of the virus, which is sort of doubtful. Okay, interventions early on mattered an awful lot. If there are additional interventions, like ending public gatherings, closing workplaces and schools, mass testing, fortifying hospitals, if those additional interventions were to begin sometime in May, which, I mean, frankly, I think that it seems like we've snapped into place pretty quickly here. I mean, it's really early March. If that happens, then you could see 4.5 million infections at the peak and 475,000 total deaths. Now, to put that in perspective, that would be like 10 times the number of people who die from the flu every year. So that would still be a massive trauma. If it's even earlier, then obviously the numbers go down. If the interventions begin 1 month later, like in the middle of July, the number of infections climbs by more than 2 million. You get 2/3 of a million deaths. So moving as quickly as humanly possible would be the best possible scenario. They're sort of suggesting that the best possible scenario, let's say that we put into action these interventions like right now. According to the Times model, you'd get 3 million infections at the peak, and you get about 320,000 total deaths. It's like their best case scenario. Okay, so maybe they're wrong. Maybe that thing wanes in the summer. But aggressiveness matters, right? If you aggressively act, if you get very aggressive, like everything shuts down, then this starts to look more like a seasonal flu. If you act right now, let's say best case scenario, you act right now, everything shuts down, the schools shut, we stop going to ball games, we stop going to if we go to restaurants, we stay far away from one another, we clean our areas. If you go to the gym, you wipe down all your equipment. You start doing a lot more things at home. Basically, you revert to sort of a cabin mentality. You're in here with your family. You go on hikes, right? Like that's sort of what your life becomes. A lot of homeschooling, less communal gathering. If you do that, then according to this New York Times model, you get 513,000 infections at peak and 51,000 total deaths. And then it starts to look much more like a seasonal flu. As the New York Times points out, what matters is not only the total number of infections, but also how many occur at once. Overloaded hospitals and shortages of ventilators in ICUs would result in people dying unnecessarily from coronavirus, as well as from heart attacks and other ailments. Successful interventions are crucial. They flatten the curve. We're much better off if the 100 million infections occur over 18 months rather than over 18 weeks. Right? If you look at the same number of ICU cases as before, but modeled at a much slower rate, to finish beneath the 95,000 available ICU beds in the country, then the number of deaths is a lot lower. So it is really important that people take aggressive actions right now, not to get in group scenarios. This is according to the scientists, okay? So I'm just citing the scientists here. This is not alarmism. This is not politically oriented in any way. Be smart. Don't go to big parties. Postpone your parties, okay? If you're going to have a wedding, you might think about postponing the wedding until post-July. Right, see where things are at in a couple of months. If you're talking about major gatherings, you might talk about postponing those major gatherings. If you're talking about a birthday party, you might think about saying, okay, you know what? Next year, we're going to go twice as big on the birthday party as opposed to getting together this year. Listen, all of this hurts. I know. I have young kids, right? I have a kid who is 6. I have a kid who is 3. I have a kid who is a week old, right? I get all this. I have parents who are in their 60s, right? So they run the gamut in terms of vulnerability. I understand my kids want to play with the other kids. My kids want to go to school. They don't want to stay home. I get all of this. I want to eat at restaurants. I want to go to ball games. I bought tickets for a ball game with my dad like a month ago. And now I'm very glad that the MLB is pushing back its season. I'm very glad that the NBA is doing what it's doing. Lock it down. Lock it down. Be responsible. And by the way, a lot of these supply lines are going to come back online in terms of hand sanitizer. Right? Don't worry about there being a permanent outage of hand sanitizer. There's a rush right now. In 2 weeks, the rush will basically be over. There will be supply lines for groceries. People are not going to starve in the United States. Even in Italy, the grocery stores and pharmacies are still operating. So right now, people are sort of buying up, understandably, right? We're all freaking out a little bit. So everybody's going to the grocery stores and they're buying out the shelves. Producer Pavel was showing me a picture from his local grocery store, and everything was taken off the shelves except for the cauliflower, oddly enough. Turns out that people would rather die than buy the cauliflower, which perfectly understandable. Vegan dishes are still not seeing an uptick in their spike here. But with that said, this will alleviate this. The one area of American life where things will continue to be produced is in the grocery and pharmacy section. Thank you for tuning in to the Daily Wire, one of the fastest growing conservative media outlets in the country. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any of our content.